Welcome to the Treasury Elite Entrepreneur Series. I would like to thank all our viewers and members for supporting this noble cause of Treasury Elite, whose main objective is networking, knowledge sharing, and mentoring. Time and again, we bring in world class speakers and business leaders across the world in the field of treasury, global financial markets, and entrepreneurship, and conduct various programs, webinars, conferences in different formats. Treasury Elite Entrepreneur Series is one such format where we learn from industry thought leaders about their experiences of running their businesses, opportunities and challenges they encounter, and broad global trends they see for the future. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Abhishek Goenka, founder and CEO of IFA Global and Treasury Elite. We bring in world-class FX, treasury, and financial transformation for companies across India over the last 15 years. And today we have Mr. Ranu Vora, co-founder and managing director and CEO, Avendus Capital. Ranu heads Avendus and is responsible for its overall growth. He has spent 20 plus years in the Indian financial services industry, right from dot-com bust to the promise of digital India. Avendus is a leading provider of financial services with an emphasis on differentiated solutions in the areas of investment banking, wealth management, asset management, and credit solutions. From being known as a cool startup operating from a garage in Mumbai in 1999 to becoming a company of 370 plus employees and consistently ranked in India's top name in the IB space and manage the country's largest hedge fund and the first ECG fund. He holds an MBA from FMS Delhi and a BTech from IIT Delhi. Welcome, Mr. Vora. How are you doing today? Glad to have you as a part of Treasury Elite Leadership Series.
Thank you, Abhishek, for inviting me and making a part of this interesting, thought-provoking series.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. In the next 35 minutes, we're going to love to learn from your experiences over the last 21 years of running Avendus. So my first question is, I think one of the most common thread which I could link with a lot of global CEOs would be, at one point of time, it's not only about the money. I would like to ask you, one of the biggest reasons for you to get out of bed every morning and get yourself to work, what is it that drives you today? Or I may ask, what is your why?
Sure. So I think certainly it's not the money. Okay. It's not you waking up in the morning, though I'm in the financial services industry. It's not me waking up and saying, what can I do today to earn X or Y or Z? I think as I reflect on it, there are three key things which I would like to do. One is have a sense of creation. I think that's very important for an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur always thrives by what he or she is able to create. The second part is about making an impact. I think all of us want to do things which are impactful in their own way. And I think so am I. I mean, I'm also a part of the same system where as an entrepreneur, I do want to make an impact. I do want to do things meaninglessly. And sometimes, money is the lowest common denominator, but it is largely for making an impact in the areas I operate in. And the third thing, which comes from, call it an engineering mindset or that thing in your brain, which kind of continuously wires you in a certain way, is essentially your problem solving. So I think as an entrepreneur, I love the feeling of problem solving. There are problems to be solved, and the best part is there's no right answer, right? And very often you go along with the problem, the answer comes to you in a few years' time. So I think it's these three things. I would say the sense of being able to create something, make an impact, and do problem solving virtually on a daily basis, which makes me get up from the bed and go and run.
So in the last 21 years, you started with an IB business, then went into various asset management, credit space, advisory business, etc. What were the major highlights and milestone and your three major learnings which you gathered over the last 21 years, which probably you could share with some of the other financial services people who are in the space who might be listening to you today?
Sure. So I think, the key milestone was, of course, the beginning, way back in late 99 when we started the firm. Taking external capital was a milestone in itself. We took external capital at 2 or 3 stages in our life cycle. When we started, the three of us who co-founded the firm, my fellow co-founders Gaurav Deepak and Kaushal Agarwal, none of us had the capital to start this. So this was completely bootstrapped in the beginning, but we found investors to help us in the first 6 months itself. So the venture capital, came in at that time. And then next round of capital was raised in 2008 and then in 2015. So I would say that always is a milestone because it's a validation of the effort you made to create some value, and also at some level, you not living in your own world and thinking you've done something good, someone else believing in it and willing to partner you for that. Whether it's KKR in 2000, end of 2015, or it was Eastgate Capital in 2008, it's the same story. And then I think the most important milestone, which I call for our business, is essentially our ability to have shown in the last 21 years, almost 18 years of growth. So on a CAGR basis, I would say last 10 years has been a 45% plus CAGR in terms of revenues, and potentially similar kind of a CAGR, slightly higher CAGR in our profitability. So
Excellent.
I think those are things which have helped us along the journey and have been milestones. But I go back to the same thing. What is the impact we've created? I think when I look at what we've been able to do, I think it's the 1,200, 1,500 entrepreneurs, business houses, family offices, which we've been able to work with over the past 21 years. And for many of them, we made a huge impact in their lives. They had sometimes businesses which needed liquidity. They had needed growth solutions, and so we have mainly a set of entrepreneurs who have hopefully kind of seen the best part of what we could offer to them, and that is by way of intellectual capital, by way of our advice, sometimes by way of our money. And that to me is a milestone that we've kind of reached, in 21 years of our existence. I think in terms of your second question on the three lessons which I've gathered over a period of time, I think the first thing I've learned is that I usually I listen to people, but I do not always listen fully to them. And as Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, it's basically sometimes you have to turn a deaf ear, right? So when we were a very small company called Pool Startups, and when we wanted to change to a vendor, several folks, including our investors, said you've got only 25 lakhs in your bank account, and we would not advise you to go around this journey of rebranding yourself and creating a new business model. But we went ahead and did that. Now, when we went to our clients, initial clients, they looked at our pitch books and said, your pitch book is the thinnest pitch book. You have fewest credentials to show, and your fees is the highest. So, for once, sometimes it's good to ignore and follow your heart, and rather than actually listen to, because an entrepreneur's journey is a journey where you actually have to take decisions not on the back of what people have done earlier or what you would like to do similar to someone, but you have to very often chart your own path. The second thing which I've realized over a period of time is to be rather direct, not very complicated in creating solutions, not to obfuscate messages, deliver a very honest, clear, simple message, whether it's to your employees or your clients, and have that level of intellectual honesty. Our industry, our businesses put us in a position where people listen to us sometimes, unlike me who doesn't listen often. And that means that you are in a position where you have to, people trust you, and you have to give them the truthful, honest message. And whether it is a situation where I'm advising a client to sell their business or advising them on investing somewhere, I think these are things which matter. So to me, that's the second important message. And the third important message is that, and I read a very nice quote in the offices of Mr. Azim Premji, who I visited Wipro, this is like 15, 18 years back, which said, there is nothing called gray. It's either black or white, right? So in life, sometimes you have to follow a certain policy in ethics, which is, just follow that policy that is either black or white. It's not gray. So I think these are the three key things I've learned over a period of time in my journey as an entrepreneur.
And that's a lovely message. Nothing is gray. It's either white or black, and get the message clear. And as you rightly said, I was talking to a very large, a chairman of a very large automobile company, and he said the same thing, and that I hear from everyone, but then I have to take a gut feel. And, I had to retrain my son who just did an MBA for 2 years and ask him to unlearn everything because he used to just take advice from every single person and then start taking a democratic decision on that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it may not. And as one of the case studies at Harvard, there's a discussion about a car which they were making, and they said, once we took a democratic call from everyone, we made the most hideous car possible on this earth. So somebody has to take a call that this car is going to look like this. It's a sporty car, or it's a sedan, or it's something like that. But you cannot have a democratic decision every time. Yes, it helps, but then ultimately, one has to take a strong call, and that's probably the
Absolutely, and just to give you a sense, no other than one of my idols, Steve Jobs, he had a view that if you ask your customer too much,
yes,
right,
they'll ask for
you will
faster
not end up
horses.
with the right product. And if you had asked way back in the early 20th century on what people wanted, they wouldn't have said we want an automobile. They would have said we need better
Faster horses.
bullock carts or horse carts or carriages or whatever. So I think it's a lot is about not having your own thinking and your own vision around things.
So rightly said. So rightly said. So you have been into the financial advisory space and allied spaces. So a lot of companies come to India and they say that being in the wealth management business, being in the financial advisory business is very tricky in India because India has a different dimension altogether. And I have been into again a financial advisory business and always felt that it's a different beast altogether as compared to the other developed markets. So what are the things that in India, our companies need to learn from developed and matured markets, whether it could be in terms of the quality of leadership, the quality of delivery, or the revenue per client. And frankly, you interact with so many people globally. What's your perspective about how international investors are now perceiving India?
Well, I'll answer it in two ways. One is, in terms of, what do international investors, your second question, what do international investors perceive us as? And the second part is more around, what do we have to learn from the developed markets in some of the industries which we are serving? Let me take the second question, which is essentially around the what do we have to learn? I think we are in several ways following certain trends, certain markets, and while there is an argument that India is a different country, we are following certain footprints in our own way. So our footprints are different. We are not trying to step into people's shoes and doing what America did in the 80s and 90s. But there are certain trends, certain patterns, and that's just got to do at the end of the day with human behavior. So I think there is a certain set pattern which emerges even in financial services, whether you look at investment banking, whether you look at credit solutions, whether you're looking at asset management. I think the journey followed is not very dissimilar from what has happened in the rest of the world. Now, obviously, the world is kind of crunched and everything is come together and information is hitting us all the time from everywhere. So that gap has reduced. But I would say that there are certain patterns which are being followed. The one thing which I have realized is that most of the financial services businesses in India are in early stages of evolution, which means that we have still a long way to go in terms of development of products, development of depth in our markets, or whether it's the debt markets or equity markets or alternate markets. So there is some way which we have to go. Now, what we have to see is we have to see what works there. And some of those things could work here. I'm not saying it's a definite. What I've realized is that when I talk to investors, families, there are two things I notice. I think we still tend to be a bit short-term oriented in our thinking. We don't think long-term. The place where I thought people are very long-term are either entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs think like 10, 20 years sometimes. Or I've realized that in matters of real estate, people think very long-term, right? When it comes to buying a plot of land, or they can visualize what will come on it. But it doesn't happen when they look at a company to invest in sometimes. Right? Or a great entrepreneur who's come to them looking for venture capital, sometimes that long-term orientation is not there. So I think what we have to learn is that there is no substitute to having to really want to kind of do well. There's no substitute to longer term, kind of look out for what can be done with that capital. And the second thing is we are a bit more outcome oriented and less system oriented in terms of what needs to be done in the system. So for instance, let me give you an example. If I have a fund, or if I run a portfolio management scheme, I would go to investors and I would say, here is the portfolio management scheme, man. Very often, the conversation starts and stops with how much have you delivered over 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and everyone, how do you compare with your peer group? And so there are clearly some, but very rarely, leaving aside the most sophisticated families, it's about the process. What is your system? what is your process, right? Because that is going to determine the outcome. So I think those are two things which I have realized in my interactions with investors here or outside India, two things which I notice a bit different in terms of how things work there and here. And then to your other question regarding how do investors perceive India, I think India is, shall I say, always just around the corner, right? I mean, I love to say that. That's the restaurant where Aventus was founded. There used to be
that's in Bandra, is it?
India is just around the corner. You talk to everyone and say, okay, we are a country which will be very different in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, depending on the time horizon and the level of optimism. So I think we have a lot of promise. But there is a lot to be done to come to that promise. In fact, I would say last decade itself, we have, if I were to look at it, if I were to compare how we are as compared to some of the other countries, how have we done in tech, etc. I think we have done well in quite a few areas, but not as well in several areas, right?
Correct.
So in some manner, I think that to me is the story of India. India is still attractive in pockets. It is a very intricate country. It is not easy to make money, regardless of what people feel. People feel, oh, India absorbs every kind of investment and you make money. And I think the other part about investors looking at India is, I think they genuinely realize that India is not a place where they can make money over a short term, because there are sometimes markets, events, things going 2 steps forward and 1 step back and so on and so forth, because of which you have to spend longer time to do the same thing. So I think there is excitement. To me, the key question is, at what stage do people pick us out of the emerging markets or BRICS or Asia basket and say this is a separate country and it has its own identity, it has its own investments, it has its own depth of markets. And I think the moment is already with us. I don't think it's something which we have to wait for. So that's the good part.
Excellent. And that's exactly what a lot of my friends in Canada and US tell me. Whenever they go to these large Miami or Vegas exhibitions where all the wealth people come in, and this is, the ticket size is very small, plus the CAGR return in terms of dollar has not been very exciting, whereas there are other markets which have given much promising returns. When you actually go and sell the India story there, people are sometimes little, not very comfortable. What's your feeling? I mean, you get the same feeling when you talk to these guys, because of the past CAGR returns.
Of course. And by the way, a part of this is to do with the markets also. I think
yes.
US has been amazing in terms of returns, but will the next 10 years it will be the same story? Probably not. Very rare to see something going on forever. So it's a matter of time that emerging markets, India, kind of takes over the crown again, and we again start seeing significant amount of investment coming into the country. And that investment is, in some manner, just finds its way of getting to the right area. So, I personally think the next 10 years ahead of us are even better than what we might have seen in the last 10.
Yeah. So, since you're talking about investments, everybody has got an asset allocation. Someone like a Ray Dalio would have, say, this much in equity, this much in debt, this much in commodity, this much in bullion, or say precious metals. If you are, since a lot of these guys who would be listening to this could be at the age of 30, 35, 40, and, common aspirations in life, having your retirement at 60 or whatever. What is the right asset allocation if you have to advise someone, keeping in mind that his risk profile is moderate and he should be able to weather volatility, not like a 50% drawdown, but something like a 15, 20% drawdown max, or a 12, 13% drawdown. Any thoughts, Ranu, on this?
I think it's a question which is very difficult to give a generalized answer to, as you'd expect. But you have let out certain constraints and certain parameters on the back of which I can probably offer some advice. I think it's about, if you ask me, it's about in India or a country like India, you would not be able to, unless you're, because of age or other reasons, you will not be well served if you're not into equities in a meaningful way. So I personally think that being in equities, regardless of the markets, is a good thing. Now, if you cannot take volatility, you can probably invest in some high quality high quality large caps. If you can take a bit of volatility, then you can add some mid caps to your portfolio and something else which keeps you more excited. But I think having equities and a reasonable allocation to equity, as much as 40-50% of your allocation to equities, in my mind, is extremely important. And I say that for two reasons. I think one is the options available to us on the fixed income front are limited, and also our in the current context, they are not enough sometimes to even cover for inflation, let alone
Correct.
other things. And
Correct.
God knows what kind of small tiny risks can move that even minuscule return which you are able to get from that. So I would say one will have to look at something where I would think real estate and gold still should continue to be a part of people's portfolio, maybe as much as 20%. And the remaining 30%, I would look at wide variety of bonds, fixed income products, bit of gold. So I would look at that. The other thing which I've realized is that a lot of sophisticated, affluent families have not been using the liberalized remittance scheme to take exposure in dollars, take exposure to outside currencies and markets. And I think if you have the knowledge and understanding, or if you have access to such people, I think it's a good idea to have a part of your wealth. If again, it's very dependent on the quantum of your purse, because below a certain purse value, I would not recommend that. But I think it's a good strategy to have that.
Part of the story.
Exactly.
So in our business, Ranu, customer delight, revenue per client, increasing the wallet share of clients is very, very important. And how do you in your firm have a culture of, or I would say innovation of having maximum customer delight, at the same time increasing your revenue and wallet share while maintaining profitability in the business?
I think that's a very, very good question. When we started some of these businesses, as usual, we heard the same things, that Indian clients don't pay, and you would have a problem, and they don't pay for advice, and the fees are minuscule. But what we've realized in this 21-year journey is that Indian clients are reasonably appreciative of value whenever you can add it, right? And fees is very often reflective of what value you've been able to add to their lives, and they don't mind giving you a large fee. I mean, sometimes we get fees which runs into 30, 40, 50 crores, and that kind of fees for someone to give in a transaction is a large enough fee. When that fee comes, you have obviously delivered a value which is several times that. So I think when I look at clients, I think there are two things which are very important to us. What is the client's overall experience with us? When we entered the financial services industry, a lot of it was around relationships. It was around wining and dining and this and that. One's not going to say that that's not required or that's not important, but the concept of value add to an interaction is extremely important. If a client is talking to you, they're talking to you because they think you are specialists in an area. So we encourage our team to do the maximum amount of research before every meeting. The kind of preparation which goes on in a vendors before every meeting is extremely solid. And then on top of it, how does that information get packaged, right? How do we make sure we are able to articulate it to the client? How do we handhold the client during the entire process, whether it is to help them invest or is to kind of help them, sell their business or raise private equity, whatever is required. I think every interaction, every piece of that interaction to us is an opportunity to show to them that we can add value. I think it's about those small pieces and making sure that you are able to produce excellence in those small pieces, which all adds up into a kind of call it an offering, which is a solution which the client very often likes, appreciates, and is willing to pay for. And once you've delivered something to the client, unless it's for you to lose them, the wallet in some manner, the wallet share, it's for you to lose that wallet share then, because the client will continue to test you out on a wide variety of things and develop a view of how much you can help them in one area versus the other area versus the third area. So I would say that, to me, wallet share is an outcome, revenue from the client is an outcome of all these little pieces we are putting together, and the excellence which we are able to bring to the table, both in terms of our product as well as go-to-market.
Great. So you have been in the process of creating multiple businesses now. How do you create a world-class leadership team, and how do you scale multiple businesses which often are at a visible and a relevant stage and may not be dominant still?
Thank you. I love this thing about bucketing businesses into visible and relevant and dominant. A lot has to do with the leadership, right? The leadership, in my mind, has to be aligned in terms of what is expected of them, how they should be aspirational, they should believe in delivering that kind of value to the clients. And very often we've seen that we are as good, right? Despite whatever we might say, and people change, but very often the quality of leadership and quality of team determine what the ultimate outcome is, because a good team and a good leader is probably 60% there or 70% there, but also leaves that 10-20% for coaching, for learning from every experience, right? That's what a good leader is. So in my mind, where, and we sometimes collate notes on leadership and what has worked and what hasn't worked. And we found that wherever, we've had leaders who have been a bit more open to listening, to coaching, I think they have done far better. And overall collaborative leaders, as opposed to leaders who see things in a very small and narrow way, do not take a platform's whole gravitas and the whole ability of the platform with them. So those leaders probably aren't as successful sometimes. And which is where we are creating this concept of One Avendus, because we felt that we have different pieces within Avendus, different businesses within Avendus. Sometimes they don't talk as much as they should to each other. The client also doesn't know that we are multifaceted. So the whole concept of One Avendus is to bring that approach so the leaders can pick up collaboration from the areas where they need. And again, a very good leader knows what he or she can do or not do, and who to go to if she or he can't do it. So I think that's very important to us. I think the concept of a leader taking other people's help, there is always a bit of vulnerability when you take help from people, right? When you say that I need help, there you expose yourself, you become vulnerable. But that's hallmark in my mind of good leadership. At least you identify honestly what you know, what you don't know. So I think, one thing we would pride in is just the quality of leadership which has joined us over a period of time, and in the fact that we've been able to provide a culture for them to deliver what is best to their potential.
Right. And how do you ensure that, the businesses which are not in a dominant stage, and you're not in number one or number two position, and there's a long gestation period for you to break even or say, make a mark in the industry. How do you make sure you align that with your core business, which has been, for your case, for say IB? How do you, there are a lot of doubts, questions which keeps coming into your mind that, whether we have done the right thing, not right. I mean, it happens with everyone. So how do you manage that state of mind?
I think we manage it by breaking it into small pieces, small milestones. And we think that even though there is a business which would have a much longer gestation period, it would probably take 10, 15, 20 years to deliver what it has, then you can always divide a goal into small pieces. To take the analogy of running, when you're running a marathon, you break it into 5 kilometer, 3 kilometer kind of targets, milestones, and you say that in the first hour, I'll run this much, in the second hour, I'll run this much, and third hour, I'll be tired, so I'll run this much, and fourth hour, I'll try and do something else. So I personally think that, just having those smaller targets and breaking up the problem into mini goals in some manner helps us get there. And as you are doing that, you also realize that in some of the newer businesses, you have to, and it's part and parcel of evolution, you make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, you learn from them and you move on. So in some manner, you have to factor in some time. Not everything will go to plan, but you have to be constantly receptive to the market and see if you made a mistake, how do you make sure you capture them early and not live with them too long?
Correct. In fact, that was my next question, that business versus marathons and how things are similar. But you, of course, answered that you have to break down in terms of miles and kilometers.
Yeah.
So one fun fact about you, what people don't know, Ranu, I know that you started marathon in 2006, I think. And since then you have been running. But what is other fun fact about you what people don't know?
I was, again, one always has several kind of things which happen, and sometimes fun or sometimes not. But I do distinctly remember, that this is a little prank which we used to play, and way back in my days at IIT, which was around, word spread around that I sing good Russian songs.
Awesome.
So I think, and it was something which I might have kind of sung in some garbled manner somewhere, and people came to me and said, look, and so interestingly, I could pass by with that garbled song as Russian song for quite a while, until the time it came time to graduate, and one of my one of my classmates said, we'd like that Russian song or whatever, and I did not realize, much to my distress, that my professors who were sitting there, one of them was actually fluent in Russian.
Awesome.
So he made me post that, and he said, "Look, I heard your song, and I think I understand Russian, but I really couldn't understand what you said, what you sang." So that was a really funny thing for me at a point in time. One has had several such instances, but you asked, and I just remember that. Yeah.
That's an awesome incident, and thanks for being candid. My last question to you: please share one major life-changing personal experience for you, and how did you evolve post that? I mean, we all have these journeys, and suddenly we get this thing that we have to change, and then we reflect back after 10 years, and we say, and we connect the dots, and we see, yeah, this is the reason and why it happened. So, any thoughts on a personal or professional front? Thanks, Ranu. I mean, it was a lovely discussion with you. You shared some of the very interesting insights on portfolio management, running a world-class professional service and a financial advisory business. Some of the candidates thought about your life and your journey and building a world-class leadership team. And I think everybody who's been listening to you today, from financial or non-financial business, had definitely garnered a lot of information, especially your culture of client delight and cutting businesses into pieces and then putting up milestones like a marathon. I think that's been amazing. That's been my takeaway. And getting out of that self-doubt kind of a thing whenever you start up something new, I think it's so very important. Thank you once again for your time. And I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.